Hello everyone, as you can already tell, everything is revolving around asparagus right now, so today we're going to continue with a classic asparagus risotto. For this we need salt, just a little bit of vanilla sugar, asparagus, which I've pre-cooked a bit, about 10 minutes in water with sugar and salt. Then we have some of the water I cooked the asparagus in, broth, white wine, butter, a lemon, a Chernobyl-sized shallot, a bit of parmesan, and some rice, risotto rice. As I said, I've already prepared the asparagus. I let it cool down in cold water. It still has a bit of bite to it, so it's not fully cooked yet because we want to cook it just a little bit more at the very end so it's perfectly done when we serve it. Cut the tips here a little bit. We want to use them as decoration. We can also halve them. And now cut the asparagus into pieces about 1 centimeter in size. I always like to throw away the last bits because I only cut the asparagus after cooking since I think that way you waste less. But the last pieces are always a bit woody, so it's better to throw them away. Now we'll make our so-called, well, you've never seen a shallot like this before. During my cooking apprenticeship, I would have been grateful if they were this big, since peeling a whole net of shallots is such a pain. It takes a lot of time, believe me. I would have liked it better with this. Write that in the recipe. God, you almost have to leave something out. It's so huge. Half of it will probably be enough for me. Just cut this down like this. You already know how to cut onions, so I don't need to explain it to the loyal fans. So, and now just slice it finely. Watch your fingers. Don't do it as fast as I do if you don't have the knife under control yet. Okay. Be a little careful. You can cut yourself faster than you think. If you want to practice your knife skills, buy a box of chives at the wholesale market and try cutting that. That's the hardest thing you can cut. If you master that, you can cut anything else well too. That's almost enough onions for me. I don't want too many. Since asparagus has a delicate flavor, I don't want to overpower. That's why I'll use relatively little broth and a bit more of the stock and white wine, just to preserve that original asparagus flavor. Now I'll add a bit of butter to the pot. There's one thing I haven't told you yet. The broth and the stock have both been brought to a boil. They're both boiling hot. Why am I doing this? If you use cold broth and cold stock, the rice will keep cooling down every time you add them, and then it always takes time for it to heat back up again. And because of that, the outside of the rice gets a mushy texture, while the inside is still a bit too hard, yeah. So when it comes to the broth should always, well, actually all stocks should always be warm. Of course, not the white wine, because otherwise it loses a bit of its flavor. All stocks should always be a bit hot before you add them. By the way, today I'm using a white wine. I just told Linus I'm cooking today with a white wine that costs 35 euros. There's still a sip left over from our last party. I don't want to throw that away. That was something really special. From Peichler in South Tyrol, an incredibly great winery. They don't pay anything, but they can always send over a few cases of wine. So, and now let's put the shallots in there. And the risotto rice. And no, it doesn't work with any other rice. You have to buy risotto rice. For a proper risotto, I've been served things in restaurants called risotto, and I thought, you've got to be kidding me. So risotto has to be creamy and a little oozy. It needs to have a good consistency. Try eating risotto in Italy, then you'll know what it's supposed to look like. The rest is just cooked rice, rizi ebisi, or whatever gets served as risotto here in Germany. Once you've let it get a little crispy, add a good splash of white wine. And stir. What's important with risotto is that for restaurants, it's kind of a tricky dish because it ties up the chef. You have to stay nearby. You can't cook all the other dishes and then quickly make risotto on the side. If you have a pasta station, it's easy. Then you've got one person dedicated to it. But that's just how it is. You have to stand by it for a bit if you want a good risotto. In fact, my experience is that the slower you cook the risotto, the more time you take. Also with the heat, the nicer and creamier it gets. We're speeding things up today since we have more videos to shoot. Once that's nearly cooked away, we'll add another splash since I still have some left. It might be a bit much, but it'd be a shame not to use such a great wine with that good flavor. Now, it's basically just a matter of waiting over and over. Wait 3 minutes, then top it up. Wait 3 minutes, then top it up. We always alternate like this, sometimes with a bit of asparagus stock, sometimes with a bit of broth, and we keep pouring it in, but there should never be more liquid in it than there is now. So what doesn't work is just pouring all the broth in and then bringing it to a boil. That way, it won't get the right consistency. You also have to give the grain the chance to develop that starch and create the consistency of the risotto. That's really, really important. It just takes a bit of time. Today, I'm adding a little bit of vanilla sugar. I got that from my dear friend Stefan Marquardt. He always used to like it that way. He used to add vanilla sugar to savory dishes. With some things, it gives a really sophisticated flavor. Of course, you shouldn't add so much that it stands out, just a subtle hint. For example, with peperonata, you saute peppers, make a sauce, and add a bit of vanilla sugar. At first, it doesn't seem great. You never really know what's in there that tastes so amazing. Huh? It just takes time. A risotto simply takes 30 minutes. That's just how it is. You need to take the time. Finish cooking it in peace. I'm going to keep my mouth shut now. I'll mute myself for a bit. And you'll see how it's topped up and stirred from time to time. Because if I showed you the whole process now, you'd fall asleep at home. So let's do it quickly, and then we'll finish it up. Okay, my dears. The risotto rice is still a bit hard now. It's important to keep tasting the risotto to check how cooked it is, because the worst thing is an overcooked risotto. For me, that's even worse than a risotto that's still a bit too hard. I'd rather eat the crunchy risotto than the overcooked one, but ideally it's just perfect. Taste it. You might have seen, I'll move this here for you. I used a lot of asparagus stock and very little beef broth, or veal broth in this case. That's part of the reason. I already told you before, I don't want to overpower the flavor, and I also don't want the risotto to get too brown. The broth naturally brings a certain color with it. That's why, if you really want to do it right, a veal stock would be the right choice. A very light one, just made from boiled veal bones. That way you'll get a bit of that fine veal flavor in there, but the risotto will stay nice and white. Right now we have a bit of a yellow tint. That doesn't bother me, it's just for Linus and me. The main thing is that it tastes good. Now let's turn down the heat to 4. Now I'll add a splash of the asparagus stock. It needs to be a bit more liquid now, because the cold butter we're adding and the parmesan will thicken it up. You just mustn't add the parmesan too early. You really have to be careful with that. Otherwise, it can get, as they say, soapy. So if the rice is still a bit too hard and you already add the parmesan, then it has a strange aftertaste. Parmesan and butter don't always go in right at the very end. The rice is almost done. Add the parmesan, butter, and asparagus pieces so they can heat up. But that's all right at the very end. A mistake could happen if you realize the risotto needs 5 more minutes after adding the asparagus, causing your perfectly pre-cooked asparagus to become overcooked. Because little pieces of asparagus don't need long before they get overcooked. They should only be warmed up for 20 or 30 seconds at most. That's it. They already have the right consistency. You can also make the asparagus risotto with raw asparagus without pre-cooking it. Then about 10 minutes before it's done, you start adding the asparagus. That works in theory too. The only reason I also like to do it the other way around is because then I immediately have a nice broth to start with. That's the only reason I pre-cook it. I think the stock is important for the base. Very, very fine, even now. Really tastes really delicious. Maybe the wine has something to do with it too, because I just tell myself that it has to be especially good now. So now you add the cold butter and the Parmesan cheese. Turn off the heat. It shouldn't really boil anymore, just let it gently rest. And now we stir this in. You can already see how nice and creamy it's getting. Right now, it's still a bit too runny. That means you just let it sit for a little while longer. The rice still needs about 20 or 30 seconds to absorb a bit more liquid. Now we add the asparagus pieces. The risotto shouldn't get much thicker than this. Italians like to eat their risotto almost like a soup. Now we can start adjusting the seasoning. Add a splash of lemon juice for freshness. A small pinch of salt as well. What I forgot to mention earlier, you need to be a bit careful with your liquids and the salt. Depending on how salty your broth is and how salty your cooking water was, because asparagus cooking water should be very salty and very sweet, so quite a lot of both. If it gets too salty for you afterwards, you always reduce it down. That means you have a salt content in the water. That reduces again. The mixture has absorbed salt again. The bell is ringing outside. By the way, that's a hint for you to click the bell below. You'll get notified when I upload a new video. What I wanted to say is if you keep reducing a broth and keep reducing and reducing salted asparagus cooking water, of course the salt content remains in the product. And it will end up being way too salty in the end. If the asparagus stock is too salty for cooking, simply add a splash of water. Okay. For me, the risotto now has exactly the right consistency. That's how it should be. Really nice and loose and creamy. I wanted to use a dark plate, but this one isn't ideal since the food will spread out too much. But I think you should see what the consistency is like. Super awesome. Really super delicious. We were just saying, Linus and I, there's really nothing better than a well-made risotto. When it comes to rice, I'm actually not that big of a rice fan, but when it comes to rice dishes, I think this is absolutely amazing. That's the best for me, since the rice finally has flavor. What I could do without is that bland rice that doesn't taste like anything, which is always served as a side dish with these meals. That's not for me. I'd prefer risotto. Okay, let's taste it one last time. No kidding, I could dive right into this. I could eat this every day. It tastes so delicious. And now simply put something on here. Like this. And it can't be any firmer, guys, seriously. There still has to be a little bit of liquid running out. Now, the last thing I like to do, I don't add much garnish, just a bit of pepper. And grate a few more Parmesan shavings on top, yeah? Because it just looks really nice. Now just add a sprig of mint. Well then, my dears. Only one thing is missing. I've already tried it 5 times, so I already know how hot it is. If you don't believe me, there's only one thing left for you to do. Cook it yourselves, my dears. You won't regret it, I promise you. Leave a like, subscribe, tell your friends, blah. Of course, hit the bell and so on. You can also become a channel member if you want. 70 people have already signed up. If a few more join, we would be very grateful. Look, we'll put a link here for you. Yes, there's a donation button below, and any contributions would be greatly appreciated. That would be very nice. And now we wish you a good meal. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye. See you.